Canadian banks are 100% safe, right? So most people around the world think that Canadian banks are these brilliantly run examples of fiscal responsibility. Even most Canadians think that our banks are 100% safe. This video will probably come as a shock, and I'm not saying that as clickbait. So you might have heard recently, but it's unlikely that you did hear because no media is covering this story, but the government had to step in and crank up the repo money taps to the banks. How much? You might ask. Well, it was the 25th of July. We were up to $16 billion per day. Now, that's almost as much as the weekly shrimp bill on a Trudeau junket. Financealot on X stating one or more of the banks are in trouble, which is quite possible, but very few people believe this because Canadian banks are the safest in the world. Now, when I ask people, I push them, why do they think this about Canadian banks? They almost always give the reason that during the 2008 financial crisis in the U.S., banks in the States were receiving bailouts. Canadian banks were resilient. They didn't need any bailouts, did they? Now, you can't be faulted. Let's look at some of the quotes made at the time by the bigwigs that crafted this false safest banks narrative. Jim Flaherty, the Canadian finance minister, claimed, "We did not put any taxpayer money into our financial system, nor will we need to." Stephen Harper, prime minister at the time, the only banks in the Western world with no bailouts. Flaherty again, without wanting to appear arrogant or vain, which would be quite un-Canadian. Blah, 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 Canadian banks are awesome. Now, spoken in French here in Canada, we call those le stinking lies, but very well hidden lies that most Canadians believe to this very day, as do people around the entire world. Now, this little-known report that was created by economist David McDonald at the CCPA using numbers that he painstakingly had to extrapolate because nobody will release the actual data, showed Canadian banks between 2008 and 2010 received over $114 billion. Now, Canada is a pretty small country compared to the U.S. To put that in context, that would have represented $3,400 for every Canadian human being alive at the time, including children. Now, the banks officially deny that this money was for bailouts, instead claiming this money was for liquidity support. And that's kind of like saying this money isn't for liquor, it's for liver-related activities. So this chart shows which banks took the most at peak support and how that number related to the value of the entire company. Now, take a look. The CIBC at one point had to take over 148% of the value of the entire company. You can see that three banks, CIBC, BMO, and Scotiabank, were at one time or another completely underwater. Now, this should have been front page news, right? But only a few outlets covered this story. And to this day, the lie that Canadian banks are failure-proof continues. So yes, Canadian banks took bailouts, and not only that, they took money from the U.S. Federal Reserve, also from the Bank of Canada and from the CMHC. Now, you really need some cajones grandes to take money from all these places, including $33 billion from the U.S. Fed, and then claim, not to appear vain, but we are the best bank in the world. And of course, getting all of those billions of dollars must have been hella stressful at the time, so CEOs took an average of 19% raise because, hey, it's tough to live on less than $15 million a year. And that's actually true today thanks to inflation, but back then, not so much. Now, to keep this money train rolling, bank employees are told to dupe customers into buying products that they don't need. One employee of the thousands that complained to the CBC said he feels more like a flea market rather than a bank. And if sales targets aren't met, bank employees are faced with termination. So they say they have to act in an unethical manner. Now, that expose was done back in 2017. Has anything been done? And you might say, okay, Canadian banks, maybe they're not angels, and they might bend the truth now and again, but our housing market that supports them is very strong. We could never have a situation like the USA in 2008. Well, the IMF, International Money Fund, placed Canada at the highest risk for mortgage defaults out of 38 advanced economies. Canada is the highest risk country right now for mortgage defaults. 1 in 3 Canadians today regrets their current mortgage. Now, we all know housing prices in Canada are insane. This house in Vancouver, for example, that'll cost you $5.5 million. Now, what happens if either rates start to go up again or if unemployment rises, people are losing their jobs? Canada has not been innovating, right? Our entire economy runs on real estate. 40% of all of Canada's GDP is in housing. Why do anything as a Canadian citizen if the equity in your house is increasing by $200,000 a year? And consider this, in most major cities right now, $1 million won't even buy you an average house. Prices have been increasing to the point nobody can afford to get in if you have not already got in. And Canadians already have the highest household debt of any other G7 nation by far. And Canadians who are debt-free, that number has been dwindling too. 1999, 72% of seniors were debt-free. 2019, that number was down to 56%. And I couldn't find an updated chart. It seems they've stopped making it, but it's probably even less today. So can Canadian banks fail? Absolutely, just like any other banks. And my random guy on the internet prediction is that Canada is going to experience a significant economic contraction, perhaps even larger than the US in 2008. Canadian banks are not completely bulletproof, and complacency in these cases could be dangerous. Now, I made a little short video under 1 minute on how Canada Deposit Insurance works, how you can protect your money. I'll place that link up above. And more doom and gloom on Canada, I'll put that link down below. Thanks for watching.